In the sweltering summer of 1845, a courtroom in Baltimore buzzed with tension. The air was thick with anticipation as a man stood before the judge, his fate hanging in the balance. This was no ordinary trial. The defendant, a broad-shouldered black man with piercing eyes, faced an accusation that seemed almost laughable. He was charged with being an impostor, a fraud masquerading as a former slave. The prosecution painted him as a charlatan, spinning tales of hardship and escape to manipulate the sympathies of abolitionists. They sneered at his eloquence, declaring it impossible for a man of his background to possess such command of language. Little did they know, the man before them was Frederick Douglass, and his story would reshape the very fabric of American history. Before we continue with this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comment section, and if you are a lover of justice and inspirational stories, don't forget to like, comment, and hit the subscribe button for more of these gripping tales. As the gavel struck, echoing through the hushed courtroom, no one could have predicted the extraordinary turn of events that would unfold. This is the tale of a man who rose from the depths of slavery to become a beacon of hope, a voice for the voiceless, and a thorn in the side of injustice. Frederick Douglass's journey from chains to the halls of power is more than a story of personal triumph. It is a testament to the indomitable human spirit, a challenge to our understanding of identity, and a searing indictment of a system that sought to crush the dreams of millions. But as we unravel the threads of this remarkable life, we must ask ourselves, what forces conspired to bring Douglass to this moment? What hidden truths lay beneath the surface of his accusers' claims? And how would this trial, seemingly designed to silence him, instead become the catalyst for a revolution? Our story begins on a cold February day in 1818, on the windswept shores of Talbot County, Maryland. Here, amidst the sprawling tobacco fields and the oppressive weight of slavery, Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey was born into a world that sought to deny his very humanity. From his first breath, young Frederick's life was marked by loss and separation. Torn from his mother's arms as an infant, he was raised by his grandmother, Betsy Bailey. The warmth of her love would be a fleeting comfort in a childhood marred by cruelty. As Frederick would later write, I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. This uncertainty, this erasure of identity, was just one of the many indignities heaped upon those trapped in the iron grip of slavery. At the tender age of 7, Frederick's world shifted once again. He was sent to Baltimore to serve in the household of Hugh and Sophia Auld. It was here, in this bustling port city, that the seeds of his future liberation would be planted. Sophia Auld, in an act of kindness that would have far-reaching consequences, began to teach young Frederick to read. Her husband, upon discovering this, was furious. "If you teach that nigger how to read," he thundered, "there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave." These words, intended to crush Frederick's spirit, instead ignited a fire within him. He realized then the power of education, the threat it posed to the institution of slavery. From that moment on, Frederick pursued knowledge with a fervor that would define his life. But the path to freedom was fraught with danger and disappointment. Frederick's early attempts to escape were met with failure and brutal punishment. He was sent to work for Edward Covey, a notorious slave breaker known for his sadistic methods of crushing the will of rebellious slaves. For 6 months, Frederick endured Covey's relentless abuse. But on a sweltering August day in 1834, something within him snapped. When Covey attempted to beat him, Frederick fought back. For 2 hours, they grappled in the barn, neither man willing to yield. In this moment of defiance, Frederick tasted the first sweet drops of freedom. As Frederick's resolve hardened, so too did the opposition against him. The slave owners, overseers, and the entire legal system of the antebellum South conspired to keep him and millions like him in chains. The societal prejudices against African Americans ran deep, a poisonous undercurrent that threatened to drown any hope of equality. But even in the darkest of times, hope found a way to shine through. In 1838, Frederick met Anna Murray, a free black woman who would change the course of his life. Anna, with her quiet strength and unwavering support, provided Frederick with the means and courage to attempt one final, desperate bid for freedom. Disguised as a sailor, with papers borrowed from a free black seaman, Frederick boarded a train bound for the north. His heart pounded with each passing mile, every station a potential trap. But fate, it seemed, was finally on his side. On September 3, 1838, Frederick stepped onto the shores of New York a free man. The relief he felt was overwhelming, but tinged with the bitterness of knowing that millions remained in bondage. It was at this moment that Frederick Douglass, as he would come to be known, dedicated his life to the cause of abolition. Anna Murray soon joined him in New York, and they were married. Together, they would face the challenges that lay ahead, Anna's steadfast support allowing Frederick to pursue his calling as an abolitionist speaker and writer. As we reflect on Frederick Douglass's early years, we are confronted with a question that echoes through time. How did these harrowing experiences shape his unwavering determination to fight for freedom? What inner strength allowed him to transform the pain of his past into a powerful force for change? The answer, perhaps, lies in the very adversity he faced. Each lash of the whip, each denied opportunity, each moment of degradation, served not to break Frederick Douglass, but to forge him into a weapon against injustice. His experiences gave him an unassailable authenticity, a voice that could not be silenced. But as Douglass rose to prominence in abolitionist circles, a new challenge emerged. How would a man who had known nothing but oppression navigate the complex world of politics and power? And how would those who had never known the lash of a slave master's whip receive his message? As the train rattled northward on that fateful September day in 1838, Frederick Douglass sat in tense silence, his heart pounding with each passing mile. Dressed in a sailor's uniform, borrowed papers clutched tightly in his sweating palms, he was embarking on the most perilous journey of his life, the path to freedom. Every face that turned his way sent a jolt of fear through his body. Every stop threatened to be his last. The irony was not lost on him. Here he was, a man in search of liberty, feeling more trapped than ever. But the prize at the end of this treacherous road was worth any risk. After what seemed like an eternity, the train pulled into New York. As Douglass stepped onto the platform, he was hit by a wave of emotions, relief, disbelief, and an overwhelming sense of possibility. He had done it. He was free. But this freedom, as he would soon learn, came with its own set of challenges. In the years that followed, Douglass threw himself into the abolitionist movement with fervor. His powerful oratory skills, honed in secret during his years of enslavement, now became his greatest weapon. Audiences were captivated by his eloquence, his passion, and the vivid details of his experiences. But as Douglass's star rose in abolitionist circles, so too did the skepticism of those who couldn't believe that a former slave could possess such command of language and depth of thought. Whispers began to circulate. Doubts were raised. And then, in a twist that would have seemed unthinkable just a few years earlier, Frederick Douglass found himself standing before a court in Baltimore, accused of being a fraud. The courtroom was packed on that sweltering day in 1845. The air was thick with tension as the prosecution laid out their case. They painted Douglass as a charlatan, a northern impostor masquerading as a former slave to manipulate the sympathies of abolitionists. How could a man who had spent his life in bondage speak with such eloquence? How could he quote Shakespeare and discuss complex political ideas? As Douglass listened to these accusations, a fire burned within him. This was more than just an attack on his character, it was an assault on the very cause he had dedicated his life to. If he could be discredited, if his story could be dismissed as fiction, then the brutal realities of slavery could be more easily ignored. But Frederick Douglass was not a man to back down from a fight. In a move that would change the course of his life and the abolitionist movement, he decided to respond not just with words, but with his pen. While the court case proceeded, Douglass began work on his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. In this powerful work, Douglass laid bare the harsh realities of slavery. He wrote of the whippings, the hunger, the crushing of the human spirit. But he also wrote of his journey to literacy, his growing understanding of the world, and his unwavering desire for freedom. The book was raw, honest, and undeniable. When Narrative was published, it sent shockwaves through American society. Here was proof, in Douglas's own words, of the life he had lived and the system he had escaped. The book became a bestseller, catapulting Douglas to national prominence and silencing many of his critics. But Douglas didn't stop there. He used the courtroom as a stage, turning the accusation of fraud into an opportunity to further the abolitionist cause. His defense became an indictment of the entire system of slavery. With passion and eloquence, he spoke not just of his own experiences, but of the millions still held in bondage. As news of the trial spread, Douglas's influence in the abolitionist movement grew exponentially. He was invited to speak at ever larger gatherings, his words inspiring both free blacks and sympathetic whites to join the cause. But with this growing influence came growing danger. Slave catchers, emboldened by the Fugitive Slave Act, were constantly on the lookout for Douglas. In a bold move to escape this threat and to spread his message even further, Douglas embarked on a speaking tour of Ireland and Great Britain in 1845. For 2 years, he traveled across the British Isles, speaking to packed halls about the horrors of American slavery. The contrast between the reception he received abroad and the treatment of blacks in America was stark, further fueling his determination to bring about change in his home country. Upon his return to the United States, Douglas found himself embroiled in a new controversy. He had begun to develop a radical interpretation of the U.S. Constitution, arguing that it was, at its core, an anti-slavery document. This put him at odds with many abolitionists, including his former mentor William Lloyd Garrison, who viewed the Constitution as irredeemably pro-slavery. Douglas's stance was controversial, but it was also strategic. By arguing that the Constitution supported abolition, he was attempting to use the very foundation of American law to undermine the institution of slavery. It was a bold move, one that showcased Douglas's growing political acumen. As the 1850s dawned, Frederick Douglass had transformed from a fugitive slave into one of the most prominent figures in American public life. The accusation of fraud, intended to silence him, had instead amplified his voice. The courtroom in Baltimore, meant to be the site of his downfall, had become the launching pad for a new phase of his career. But as Douglas's influence grew, so too did the forces aligned against him. The nation was hurtling towards a conflict that would tear it apart, and Douglas found himself at the center of the storm. How would he navigate the treacherous waters ahead? And how would his experiences shape his role in the impending Civil War? As we stand on the brink of the most tumultuous period in American history, we must ask ourselves, how did Frederick Douglass's journey from accused fraud to national leader prepare him for the challenges to come? And what lessons can we draw from his ability to turn adversity into opportunity? As the nation teetered on the brink of civil war, Frederick Douglass stood at the forefront of the abolitionist movement, his voice ringing out with a clarity and power that could no longer be denied. The accusations of fraud that had once threatened to silence him had become nothing more than a footnote in his extraordinary journey. Douglass had not only vindicated himself, but had emerged as one of the most influential leaders of his time. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 presented Douglass with new challenges and opportunities. He saw the conflict not just as a battle to preserve the Union, but as a chance to finally eradicate the scourge of slavery from American soil. Douglass tirelessly lobbied President Abraham Lincoln to make emancipation a central goal of the war effort and to allow black men to fight for their own freedom. His persistence paid off. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and black soldiers began to be recruited into the Union Army. Douglass's sons Charles and Lewis were among the first to enlist in the 54th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment, one of the first black units in the U.S. Army. Douglass himself traveled throughout the North, his powerful oratory inspiring black men to take up arms for the Union cause. As the war drew to a close, Douglass turned his attention to the monumental task of rebuilding the nation and securing the rights of the newly freed slaves. He played a crucial role in advocating for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which abolished slavery, granted citizenship to former slaves, and gave black men the right to vote. Douglass's reputation as a leader and statesman continued to grow in the post-war years. In 1877, he was appointed U.S. Marshal for the District of Columbia by President Rutherford B. Hayes, becoming the first African American to hold a high government position. This appointment was followed by roles as Recorder of Deeds for the District of Columbia and as U.S. Minister to Haiti. But even as he ascended to these positions of power, Douglass never forgot the struggles of his people. He continued to fight tirelessly for civil rights, using his platform to speak out against lynching, segregation, and the many forms of discrimination that persisted in American society. Douglass's commitment to justice extended beyond the cause of African Americans. He became a strong advocate for women's suffrage, recognizing that the fight for equality knew no gender boundaries. At the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, Douglass had been one of the few men to support Elizabeth Cady Stanton's resolution for women's suffrage. He continued this support throughout his life, often facing criticism from both black men who felt he was diluting their cause and white suffragists who resented his insistence on linking women's rights with black rights. As we reflect on the impact of Douglass's life, we are struck by the breadth and depth of his influence. His writings and speeches, from the searing narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass to his famous "What to the Slave is the 4th of July" address, became cornerstones of American literature and political thought. His ideas on civil rights, education, and the nature of American democracy continue to resonate today. Douglass's transformation from slave to statesman is a testament to the power of the human spirit and the enduring promise of American ideals. Born into bondage, denied even the most basic human rights, he rose to become one of the most respected and influential figures of his time. His life story embodies the very essence of the American dream, while also serving as a stark reminder of the nation's darkest chapter. The legacy of Frederick Douglass extends far beyond his own lifetime. His tireless advocacy for equality and justice laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement of the 20th century. Leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and Martin Luther King Jr. would all draw inspiration from Douglass's life and work. As we stand here today, looking back on the extraordinary life of Frederick Douglass, we are compelled to ask, what lessons can we draw from his legacy for our ongoing struggle for equality and justice? First and foremost, Douglass's life teaches us the power of education and self-improvement. Despite the enormous obstacles placed in his path, Douglass understood that knowledge was the key to freedom. His journey from illiterate slave to renowned orator and writer is a powerful reminder of the transformative power of learning. Secondly, Douglass's unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, serves as an inspiration to all who fight for equality. He understood that progress is not inevitable, but must be fought for with persistence and courage. Thirdly, Douglass's ability to build coalitions and find common ground with diverse groups reminds us of the importance of unity in the face of injustice. His support for women's suffrage and his willingness to work with both radical and moderate abolitionists demonstrate the power of inclusive activism. Finally, Douglass's life is a testament to the enduring power of words and ideas. Through his speeches and writings, he was able to change hearts and minds, shaping the course of American history. In an age of sound bites and social media, Douglass's eloquence and depth of thought remind us of the importance of substantive dialogue and reasoned argument. As we face the challenges of our own time, persistent racial inequalities, threats to voting rights, and ongoing struggles for social justice, the life of Frederick Douglass offers both inspiration and instruction. His journey from slavery to the heights of American public life is a powerful reminder that change is possible, that justice can prevail, and that one individual, armed with courage and conviction, can indeed bend the arc of history towards justice. In the end, perhaps the most enduring lesson from Frederick Douglass's life is this: freedom is not given, it is taken. It must be fought for, protected, and passed on to future generations. As Douglass himself said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. These words ring as true today as they did over a century ago, challenging us to continue the work of building a more just and equitable society. As we close this chapter of our story, we are left with a question that echoes through time: how will we, in our own lives and in our own time, carry forward the legacy of Frederick Douglass? What role will we play in the ongoing struggle for equality and justice? What lessons can we draw from Frederick Douglass's life and legacy for our ongoing struggle for equality and justice? As we draw our journey through the remarkable life of Frederick Douglass to a close, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a beginning. For the story of Frederick Douglass is not merely a chapter in history books, but a living, breathing call to action that resonates through the ages. I implore you, dear viewers, to not let this tale fade into the annals of history. Instead, take up the torch that Douglass so bravely carried. Immerse yourself in his words, his thoughts, his struggles, and his triumphs. Read his autobiographies, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, An American Slave, My Bondage and My Freedom, and Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. These are not just accounts of one man's life, but windows into the soul of a nation grappling with its deepest contradictions. Delve into his speeches, from the fiery "What to the slave is the 4th of July" to the prophetic "The meaning of July 4th for the Negro." In these orations, you will find not just the eloquence of a gifted speaker, but the beating heart of the American conscience. As you explore Douglass's works, challenge yourself to see the world through his eyes. Feel the weight of the chains he bore, the exhilaration of his escape to freedom, the righteous anger at injustice, and the unwavering hope for a better tomorrow. Let his words inspire you, provoke you, and move you to action. But do not stop at mere reading. Engage with Douglass's ideas in your daily life. Ask yourself, how do the issues Douglass fought against, racism, inequality, voter suppression, manifest in our world today? How can we apply his principles of self-reliance, education, and tireless advocacy to address these ongoing challenges? Consider, for a moment, how Douglass's story continues to inspire and challenge us today. In an era where racial tensions still simmer, where the right to vote faces new threats, where economic inequality persists, Douglass's life offers both a mirror to our shortcomings and a beacon for our aspirations. His journey from slavery to statesman reminds us that change, no matter how improbable it may seem, is always possible. His unwavering commitment to justice, even in the face of overwhelming odds, challenges us to stand firm in our own convictions. His ability to evolve his thinking, to build coalitions across racial and gender lines, teaches us the power of open-mindedness and unity in the face of division. Douglass's advocacy for education as a path to empowerment resonates strongly in our knowledge-based economy. His insistence on the importance of a free press and the power of photography to shape public opinion feels remarkably prescient in our digital age. His understanding of the link between economic and political power offers insights into contemporary debates about inequality and representation. Moreover, Douglass's complex relationship with his country, loving its ideals while fiercely criticizing its failures, provides a model for engaged citizenship. He teaches us that patriotism is not blind allegiance, but a commitment to holding one's nation to its highest principles. As we face the challenges of our time, persistent racial inequalities, threats to democratic institutions, global human rights abuses, we would do well to ask ourselves, what would Frederick Douglass do? How would he articulate the challenges we face? What solutions would he propose? But perhaps most importantly, Douglass's life challenges us to examine our own roles in the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. He reminds us that history is not something that simply happens to us, but something we actively shape through our choices and actions. So I ask you, viewers, how will you carry forward Douglass's legacy? Will you educate yourself about the issues facing your community and your world? Will you use your voice to speak out against injustice? Will you build bridges across divides of race, class, and ideology? Will you exercise your right to vote and hold your leaders accountable? Remember, in the words of Douglass himself, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. The work of creating a more just and equitable society is never finished. It requires constant vigilance, unwavering commitment, and the courage to stand up for what is right, even when it is difficult. As we conclude our journey through the life of Frederick Douglass, let us not see this as the end of a story, but as the beginning of our own chapters in the ongoing narrative of human progress. Let us draw inspiration from Douglass's courage, wisdom, and indomitable spirit. Let us commit ourselves to the ideals he fought for: freedom, justice, equality, not just as abstract concepts, but as living principles that guide our actions. In doing so, we honor not just the memory of Frederick Douglass, but the highest aspirations of our shared humanity. We become part of a legacy that stretches back through centuries and forward into a future we have the power to shape. So go forth, inspired viewers. Read, reflect, and most importantly, act. For in the end, it is not enough to admire Frederick Douglass from the comfortable distance of history. We must strive to embody his spirit in our own lives, to be, in our own ways, the Frederick Douglasses of our time. The torch has been passed to us. The question is, what will we do with it? For more of this gripping story, don't forget to like, comment, share, and hit the subscribe button.